Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Data 101. Learn more about your best customers and find more like them. I'm Amy Rowan, Streamworks Marketing Director, and as many of you know, Streamworks is an integrated marketing communications company that helps clients leverage data to produce campaigns that increase response. Data is really at the heart of everything that we do at Streamworks, so we're particularly excited to bring you today's webinar. So in today's webinar, we are going to give a brief overview of different types of data and introduce you to some best practices and tools to help you get the most out of your data, including appending and profiling. So with that, let me introduce our presenter. Bethany McKay is a data consultant and part of Streamworks' data team. She has over 17 years experience helping clients leverage analytics and technology tools to put their data to work, identify prospect opportunities, and maximize their marketing return on investment. So with that, I will turn it over to Bethany.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope that you learned something. I hope we get some great questions at the end, and I look forward to answering anything that you have. Amy, it's not advancing for me. If you could turn controls over.
I will sure do that.
There you go. So first, let's just review today's agenda. We're going to talk through a little bit about some basic data information, house data versus prospect data, two very important things to understand and know how to use to your benefit, and how to combine those to use to your benefit as well. We'll talk a little bit about basic data, consumer data, business data, and then we're going to get into a little bit more in-depth data talk, where we'll talk a little bit about appending to your house file. You can add missing pieces of information and then utilize that to make your marketing campaigns a little bit more successful. And then we're going to talk a little bit about customer profiling and how you can score prospects to identify those that are going to be hopefully the most likely to respond to your campaign and increase your response rate. So let's just talk a little bit first about why data is key. And if you've been in the industry for any period of time, especially in the last couple of years, you know data really has become such a focus. They've come up with new titles that people have that are related to data. You hear titles like data scientist. You hear people talking about big data and speaking about how people are compiling information and how they can utilize that intelligence to really improve all of their campaigns, their CRM, and all efforts around their existing database and then any prospects. So we're going to dive in a little bit and talk about a little bit more of that, so we're all gaining a little understanding about how that data can actually work for our benefit. So a lot of factors are going to contribute to the success of your campaign. Data is the most significant piece. And interestingly enough, when you look at the cost that it takes to do a campaign, for instance, direct mail, the print and the postage always take up more of the budget than the data, but the data ultimately is one of the most important pieces that you plug into that campaign. Using data allows you to prospect to consumers or businesses using a different variety of attributes. So you can hone in on the types of customers, or consumers, or the types of businesses that will be the most responsive or need what you're offering most. You can personalize the look and feel of your creative. So if you're sending out a postcard to consumers and your target is an audience that, say, is over the age of 65, you may want to speak to them in a tone that would be more receptive to that age group, or perhaps show images of people that look like them, doing activities that perhaps they also do, so when they get the mail piece, it feels much more personal to them. You can profile your customers. So if you have a group of customers who've purchased from you, or even responders who've been interested in purchasing from you, you can take a look at who they are, what makes them up, what are their demographics, are they geographically located somewhere, and really profile them to learn the most you can, so that then you can take that information from the profile and apply it. We're going to talk much more about that in a few slides. With the data, you can fill in missing information. So if you are capturing your client's data and perhaps you only have their name and address, maybe you want to add some information to that, so you can do some things like versioning the mail pieces, or segmenting your data so that you give a different offer to a younger crowd maybe than you do to an older crowd, or a different offer to those who have children versus those who don't have children. Data is also going to allow you to reduce your marketing costs overall and drive up your response rates. The better you target, the better you know your audience, the better you're going to get a response, and you can actually cut back on mailing to those who wouldn't respond, saving money, and then allowing you to focus that energy and time and budget on the ones who are actually going to respond. It also lets you identify some opportunities for you to upsell and cross-sell your other products to those same customers. So let's talk about the house data versus the prospect data, talk a little bit more about your house file, types of marketing data, and then some different lists and services. So house data versus prospect data, very basic information, so we want to review to make sure everybody is on the same page. Your house data is going to be your internal customer data. It's data that you've collected over a period of time. It's people who have come into your store, who've requested information. Maybe you do some email marketing and they have interacted with you via email or gone to your website and requested information or purchased from you. That's your house data, and it's very, very valuable. It's got a lot of information in it and can be used to gain more information to really help you grow that file bigger and bigger and bigger. So that data is going to come in from all those different ways. The prospect data is going to be people who have not yet been a responder to you or a customer to you. It's all of the other people out in the area who've been compiled into a marketing file through various different sources of public record, deed recording, self-reported information through surveys, different directories and things like that. So that information is demographically rich. So once we look at your house data and determine who your best customers are, that prospect data is who you're going to market to try and convert those into being someone that actually ends up on your house data file. That's the goal. So that house data, the advantages of using that in your marketing communications are that you have a much better chance of interacting with them. They're much more receptive to you. They're familiar with your products and services. They know who you are, and they are going to be the ones that are going to come back to you. So if they raise their hand at one point with interest, if you continue to market to them, at some point we hope that they would convert, and we would want to tailor our messages to get them to actually take that next step. So we have some different services that we can do to your house data that's going to make it even more valuable and give you intelligence out of it so that you can market more effectively. So we're going to talk about data hygiene, enhancement, geocoding, some modeling, which don't get scared, we won't get into the very high level modeling. We'll talk very briefly about some profiling, which is very easy to understand, and then the next step we'll touch on so that you have an idea of where you might go after you start doing some profiling. And then some email appending as well as a lot of other appends. So prospect data, we'll talk a little bit about that so you have an understanding of the different types. Resident occupant data is going to be everybody in a particular geographic area that has a deliverable address. So when you are speaking about a pizza place, a lot of people like pizza. They like to market to people in a very close proximity to their store where they deliver and hit everyone, because at some point it's assumed everyone will order pizza. Resident occupant data is great for that. It hits everyone. Consumer data is the data that is more demographically rich. It includes those different sources of information that feed into it, their activities, their lifestyles, their age, their income. Do they have kids? What are their interests? Are they into fitness or are they artists? That kind of thing. So you can really tailor the kind of audience that you're marketing to using that consumer data. For any of you that are in the B2B market, business data is also available, and it also has a lot of selectability based on the type of business, the size of the business, the job titles that are within that business. So if you're trying to reach the owner or president for a different type of marketing offer, you certainly can. Those are compiled through a lot of different sources, from business directories, legal filings, new business registrations, and things like that. And we have a couple of other files that are out there that are available for both business and consumer, but they're more specialty files. So they get into a little bit more of a specific type of data where people perhaps have been on a membership roster, or it's a subscriber file where they have actually subscribed to Golf Digest magazine, for instance. So if you're a golf supplier and you sell different supplies for golf like clubs and balls, you want to reach people who have an interest in golf, and people who subscribe to a golfing magazine clearly have a strong interest. So that's when the more specialty files would come into play. And you can learn a lot about who to pull from this prospect data when you learn more about your house data. So they're really intertwined together. As I mentioned, this consumer data is targeting all of the consumers at their home addresses, and it really has just a ton. If I say hundreds, it's probably in the thousands if you look at multiple databases of all the demographics that you can choose from to really tailor your offer to the right audience. Some of the sources are listed over to the side: census records, public records, self-reported, licensing. There's some transactional data for purchase behaviors and things like that. So here's a sampling of some of the selection criteria that you can get on a consumer file. And if you look across, you'll see there are just a ton. Lifestyles are a great one to choose from to really hone in on who your market is. Life events as well. If you're in the business of providing services that would fit in around somebody having a first child or recently purchasing a home, you can identify those folks in prospect data. So now we're going to get into the meat of it a little bit. We'll talk about hygiene, processing the data, enhancement, and then the trade areas. So data hygiene, when you look at your customer database, there's a few things you want to kind of wrap your head around. You've got this data, and how long have you had it? So the first person that you had on that database, how long ago did you put them on? Have they moved since you put them on? You know, how often have you looked at updating your data? So before you do any type of a marketing campaign to that house file of yours, you really want to go through and utilize a hygiene process. NCOA will clean the data to move someone. If they've put in a change of address, it will locate them at their new address and give you that address. Then you can determine if they're still in your market area, if you want to continue mailing to them or marketing to them through your house file. Some of these others are listed: DSF, CAS. Those are more postal processing to make sure your address is correct. So when you mail it, it's actually going to get delivered to who you wish to deliver it to. Some other data hygiene is if you have email addresses on your file, you can cleanse those and make sure they're legitimate emails before you try to do a deployment and actually have a lot of bounces. And then data hygiene is also something you can do where you suppress some data. So perhaps you have some people who have requested not to have marketing materials come from your company. You can suppress them out of your file through some data hygiene. Data processing is really just manipulating the data that you have, putting multiple files together, cleaning them up, formatting them, deduping them to make sure you don't have more than one record for the same person or address. And then you get into the data enhancement, and that's really where you're going to start adding information. So once you get their name and address right, now you can match it up to a consumer file and add a variety of different information to it. So if you're looking to append age or presence of children or the ages of the children, you can do that by matching it to a consumer file and then moving all those demographics onto each record. Then when you're ready to do a campaign, you can segment using those different demographics. You can also append telephone numbers. So if you've interacted with these customers within the last 18 months, you can do a telephone campaign to them. You can add a phone if they didn't have one. You can also do a reverse phone. So if you end up gathering some phone numbers but you don't know who they belong to, you can reverse that and add the postal address to those phone numbers. The same thing goes for email. And now that we've moved into really more of a digital age, if you have postal data that does not have an email address on it, you can append that email address. So then you have another channel to communicate with them and be able to send out an offer via direct mail, follow up with an email. It's been proven that that really will lift your response if you combine those two channels. Same thing with email. Say you have a website and you're gathering just an email address because you want to capture them when they visit your site. We can take that email address and reverse append and add a name and an address to it. The match rates on those can be anywhere from 40% to 60%. It's going to depend on how recent the information is that's going in, how many records we'll be able to match. Then the last bullet here is about trade areas. And this is important for people to kind of understand the distance that people perhaps would travel to go to a retail storefront. Or if they're looking to open a new location, you know, where is the bulk of their customers? It might help them identify where their new market area might be. We can take client data and append a geocode to that, which is the latitude and longitude coordinates. And then that information can really be used to do some different slicing and dicing of market areas and even testing into new areas. Some of the business-to-consumer data enhancement options are these that are listed. I touched on a few of them. There's some financial pieces that are important. A lot of people use net worth. For the older crowd, they use some income-producing assets to try and understand what their wealth looks like to see if they can take advantage of different types of offers. Education, and then there's a lot of mortgage and property attributes. So for businesses that are doing home services, doing roofing or repair work, knowing some mortgage and property information might be really important to them. Maybe you want to send out a air conditioning offer to one group because it's in the time frame of when those might start becoming problematic, and maybe you want to send something out to new homeowners to talk about a warranty that you might want to offer. So this information is really, really great to help you target and refine your offers. Business-to-business data enhancement options. So if you're a business that works with other businesses and serves them, you can do the same thing. You can append just a ton of variables, all of these listed and more, to understand more about the businesses, the types of business by SIC code, so that's going to let you know what kind of industry they're in and what they do, how long they've been in business, how many people they have working for them, and if they're a headquarters or a branch, which is really important to understand where you're sending that mail piece and whose hands it might want to be, end up in. Another important one that a lot of people look at on this is to understand if it's a cottage industry, which is a home-based business or not, because that can impact the offer. So we're going to move on from there. Now we know a little bit about the data, what house data is, what prospect data is, and then how you can augment your house data by adding all those demographics through append. The next step would be really looking at that house data and understanding what makes them up. What do those people look like? And how can we find more like them? So we're going to kind of touch on this, and I promise I won't get too statistician on you. We'll just briefly go over it and then be happy to answer questions after. So modeling is geared to help you increase the effectiveness of your campaign. Not marketing to people who are not going to respond is the key. You don't want to send mail pieces to people who don't look like your clients. You don't want to send a marketing piece to someone who probably will not be a responder. You want to hone in on the ones who are going to respond to you. So with analytics and profiling, which is really the basic level of analytics, you can gain so much insight into their behaviors, their demographics, and then drive your prospect campaigns to really fit in to the people who are going to respond. So we'll talk a little bit about the descriptive profile, which is that kind of first level of entry into analytics. We're going to very briefly touch on predictive models just to give you an overall understanding. And then I'm going to go through a descriptive profile, the stream profile, which is a very easy to use tool that you will love. So we'll get into that. So there's two categories of analytics, and descriptive and predictive are the two you really need to understand. Descriptive looks at a database, your house file, for example, and it looks at what everybody looks like in there. What are their common attributes of that audience? What do they all kind of fit in? Are they all in a certain age group? Do they have kids? Are they homeowners? Do they have a certain income level? And you start to get a picture of who your customers are or who your responders are. It does not give you a prediction of behavior in the future. It really just looks at what they look like. So it's like a look-alike profile is an easy way to explain it. Predictive analytics looks at two groups of folks. So in your marketing efforts, you have responders and non-responders. Or you've done a campaign and you have the buyers and the non-buyers. In predictive analytics, you look at both of those segments. You compare and contrast. What's the same between the groups and what's different between the groups? Then you try to understand what makes them tick. So you can actually apply that intelligence to prospect data, those you're going to send a marketing piece to. And we can tell you that certain consumers or businesses are going to be more likely to respond or do what your call to action is based on looking at all that previous data. So without getting into a lot of the statistics behind it, that's the bulk of it. Predictive is going to give you a prediction of future behavior. Descriptive is going to give you more of a look-alike. So the descriptive profile called the Stream Profile. It's a very easy to use tool. It's automated. It runs very quickly. It's all set up to match up against a comprehensive database in the U.S. of consumers, and it will match to your data. So when you submit a file in, you're going to get a, say 60% match rate or 70% match rate. Again, it's going to depend on how aged your data is. And it's going to append a bunch of information and then give you information in about a 25-page report, and we're going to go through what that looks like. So it's going to give you improved response. It's going to give you a more effective way to speak to these prospects and know kind of what they're, who you need to go after so that you can tailor your message to fit in with what their kind of demographics and lives sort of look like. So here's a couple pages, and I'm going to go through several of them and just kind of show you, so when you run one of these, you'll have a great understanding of what you're going to get back. So this is the first page. In this instance, the customer put in 15,115 records, and they matched 13,318, which is fantastic. 88% match rate is wonderful. You can feel very confident in that match rate because you had so many records that matched. Down underneath here is really the meat of the whole entire profile. The top 10 variables out of the universe that was analyzed and what fell, kind of in line. So credit cards, 75% of those input have a credit card. Children in the household is unknown, which would tell me there are probably 0 children in some of those households. Auto and class of vehicle, it's unknown, which on this particular file, there are other attributes that would feed into the auto information if you needed it. We can tailor it to include those. Investments is a huge one. 71% of this universe have an investment. 70% have a credit card, and so on. So we'll get into the next slides, and we'll show you how that breaks down when you're ready to understand it. This is a listing of all of the consumer demographics that are included in the Stream Profile. You can see most of the common elements that people are going to be interested in to understand who their clients are and how they can tailor a list to prospect out. So this is giving you information about how you're going to read the slides. It gives you 2 views. One is the bar graph chart, and then one is more of a kind of an Excel sort of layout. I prefer the Excel layout, so I'm going to speak to that. But for those of you who are more inclined to understand the bar charts, that's there for you, so you can kind of pick and choose what works best for you. There's always going to be a region map, and if your data is in a smaller area, it will zoom in. If you have outliers, it's going to end up showing the whole United States, but it gives a great idea when it's a list that's in a relatively small market area. You can really see some of the pockets of where your customers fall. So we'll get into a few of these slides. We have the age band. It's an individual age band, so it's going to tell you how many people in this list that you uploaded fit these different age groups. So if you look at that grid on the right, you see that people 18 to 24 in the customer count, that first column, there are 53. Then you look over to the right of that, and you can see there's 148 prospects. That means in the same geographic area by zip code of what you uploaded, we are finding 148 people that are 18 to 24 years old. So that penetration index is giving you an idea of how many people your customer file has penetrated in the whole prospect universe of those falling in that same age group. The higher the penetration index number is, the better you have done of drawing in that attribute or that age group. It does not mean the higher the number, the least amount of prospects you have available to you or that you have saturated the market. It's really more about how well you've done pulling in certain age groups and how many others there are out there in that same area. So if you look at the highlighted line, 45 to 54, that's going to give you a high penetration index. You can see most of the input file was 3,138 of those folks fell between the ages of 45 and 54. So at a glance, if you were using this profile, you would know you want to hone in on that 45 to 54 age group and even some of those right above and below it, because that's the bulk of who your customers are. We're going to go through some of these slides. They are all set up the same way. So I'll give you a second to kind of look at them, and I'll point out some things that are important. We won't spend a lot of time on each and every one. We can certainly talk about that after if you have questions. So married versus single. If I was this, if this was my house data, I might not think that married or single is a huge difference. It's quite broken out. Most of them are actually single, but it's a pretty good spread. So that may not be a huge factor. If I was doing some prospect data selections, I might not include that. Estimated household income, very important to most folks. This is going to tell you where the income falls. Now on this slide, I want to point something out. We've shaded in orange those with the highest penetration index, but you still have to take a peek at how many customers fell into what age or income group. You can see 50,000 to 74, 75 to 99, and then 100 to 125,000 really is the bulk of the customer input file. But oddly, those aren't the ones shaded with the higher penetration index. The reason for that is, if you look at the prospect count, it's much higher in the 50 to 125K area than it is in those smaller incomes, 20 to 40, for instance. So the penetration index is going to be high there. On the back end of the stream profile, all of the prospect information and penetration index information is plugged into an algorithm. So all of that is taken into account. It looks at the customer count and the prospect count in addition to that penetration index to make sure when we score the prospect universe to give you those who look the most like your customers, it will be accurate. So let's go through a few more of these slides, and I'll let you take a peek at them so you can kind of understand exactly what you're going to get. On this slide, unknown is quite high, and that's going to happen on any of the slides because if they don't have it coded, they're not going to give you that information. They don't want to give you anything that's false or erroneous. The stream profile matches on name and address, so you're sure that you're not profiling someone who lives at an address or maybe someone else has moved in. That is another kind of fail-safe that's plugged in. So we're going to get through some of these. Dwelling type, you can see here, single and multifamily was fairly even in the customer count. Length of residence, again, you can look down at the 15 plus, and a lot of the customers fell into that age group. The stream profile can be used in two ways. The first way is to look at all of this information and then decide how you want to pull a prospect list. You can use some of the intelligence like age and income, do they have children, some of the lifestyle dimensions like we see here, are they into healthy eating? Is that something important to your business? And you can just pull some of the prospect data using a few selections from what you learn. Or you can take this and pull it from our algorithm that gets placed on the back end of the data. There's something in the profile called lifestyle dimensions. And these are kind of roll-ups of interest. So just to give you an idea of what's built into it, like healthy living is going to be people who do exercise, self-improvement, natural foods. They're worried about, more health. So that is kind of plugging them into sort of a bucket for healthy living. Luxury life, again, is going to be, people who are into wine, fashion, home decor, etc. So we try to group these together almost in a segmentation type of tool, so you also can get a view into that and what your customers look like. So a few questions about the profile that we'll go through just to give you some, these are the most commonly asked questions. Should you split your file by region? Absolutely. If you cover a large region, you definitely want to split it up. You'll see in the case study at the very end, it's very important to segment that. If you think about what the demographics are of someone who lives in Waco, Texas versus somebody who lives in Miami might look very different. Somebody who lives in New York City or Manhattan probably looks different from somebody who lives in the middle of Nebraska. So keep that in mind. If you have large coverage, you want to split that up into some regions so that your data is examined a little bit more accurately. Now, if you have more than one location, should you do a profile for each? Absolutely. Unless you're in the same city and it's a very tight area and the distance between the two locations isn't very far, you might want to look at doing one. But in most cases, you're going to want to do one around each location. You only need 500 records to upload into the system. You can upload as many as 100,000 records into the system. Regarding the minimum, 500 is the bare bones minimum you have to use to get the profile to run. I recommend 1,000 records if you possibly have them. It will give you a better ability to have a better match rate and learn more about more of your customers. You get prospect counts, like I mentioned. If you want to use this profile to find your best prospects, you can simply ask to have a count run in whatever geography you'd like against the profile, and it will give you back a report that tells you the best, better, and good, basically, 3 buckets of who you should market to, and then you don't have to do any of the thinking or work about what demographics to pick and choose. The system will actually do all of that for you. Match rates are going to depend on the recency of your data. So if your house file has been built over 5 years, even if you run it through some hygiene, you can expect to have maybe a little slightly lower match rate. Anywhere between 40 and 60% match is fine. In the consumers, you're probably going to match a little higher than that, and in the businesses, which you can do the profile in businesses as well, it's going to be a little bit lower, and that's typical of business file match rates. The databases that it uses to profile the customer data is going to be split between the consumer and the business. You'll have access to the profile for up to 6 months. After that, you would want to produce new client data and run a new profile to make sure you're capturing all of the new demographics that fit in. These databases are updated every single month. So after about 6 months, the time spread and changes in demographics would be substantial enough that you'd want to run a new one. And then, again, you'll have access to it for 6 months, and then at that 6 month point, that's when you'd want to renew. And then, as I mentioned, you're going to get 3 buckets that are going to come back out when you're ready to make a prospect data purchase against this. This is going to allow you to pull the premium is where you start, and if you have great success and you keep going, you get into that preferred bucket. And then your select is probably equal to just picking prospects yourself using some demographics. So we really kind of focus on the premium and the preferred buckets. And then I just want to touch on predictive modeling very briefly. Again, it is going to analyze the data differently than a profile. It's going to look at past activities, current activities, and the behaviors of your responders, non-responders, buyers or non-buyers. It needs to be 2 sets of data that are almost opposing sets of data so that when they look at them and compare and contrast, they can gain the insight to be able to say, we can see the attributes in the buyers and we know why. We can propose that these other prospects over here are going to become a buyer. It gets a lot more mathematical and statistical than the profile does. It takes a little bit more time as well. So responders and non-responders, as I mentioned, it can also be buyers and non-buyers. And then in the nonprofit world, it can also be donors and non-donors. And then the scores are applied to either customer data. If somebody has a large customer file, 100,000 records, and they've been mailing to it for some time, and maybe they're seeing declining response rates, that is going to, the predictive model is going to allow us to run a model and then score their data and say, you don't need to mail to these folks here at the bottom. Just focus on these guys up here, and you're going to get the same match, the same response rate in the same way that you can append that model algorithm to prospect data and try to find those who are going to be the most responsive to your offer. So putting the intelligence to use to wrap this up is you're going to get people who are more actively involved, have longer lifetime relationships with you, and will spend more than the average customer by using statistically identified responders who look like your best customers. You're able to do this. You're able to lower your direct mail costs because you're using more of a specific focus versus looking at everybody and mailing to everybody and just seeing who comes back. You're really going to hone in on those who you think are actually going to be a conversion and come back and make a purchase. Then I wanted to share with you a case study that just speaks to even a couple of those FAQs that I went through, the most commonly asked questions. A nationally known fitness chain who has locations all around the country had come in looking for some suggestions on how they could do a better job of marketing. They were sending out a ton of mail pieces, and they had really a fantastic response rate, but they knew it could be better, and they knew that they needed to keep going because with a fitness chain, people join and people fall off. So they have to keep a really steady stream of folks coming in the door. So we suggested that they actually do a profile for each location. In their case, their locations were spread out far enough that we didn't feel confident that we could bundle any of them together and get a real great picture. So we ran several. We examined the demographics around each store, which again, think Los Angeles versus Omaha, they're going to look different. We identified a lot of demographics that helped them really tailor their marketing efforts. They saved 25% on their mailing costs because they stopped sending to pretty much everyone and started focusing on those who were going to be more like the people they had currently as members. And their response rates went from 9%, which was fantastic in the beginning, all the way up to 22%. So with that response rate, they were able to keep that along with the savings that they had from doing a more targeted campaign and continue to open new locations and market better. So it was really a huge win for them, and they've continued to do it ongoing. So it was really fantastic. So with that, I hope that gives you kind of a view into what the profile can do, the intelligence it's going to give you, and now I think we will open it up for questions.
Definitely. We've had some questions come in. If you've got questions at this point, I know it's a lot to digest, so either submit them now, or you can definitely circle back with your StreamWorks rep offline, and we'd be happy to answer any questions or go more in depth about any of this if you'd like. But Bethany, these are they're different questions, but they all kind of play into each other, so I'm going to ask kind of a multi-part one. How often should I append my data file? And then the other parts of this, how often are consumer and business prospect databases updated, and how current is the information if I do append?
Okay, sure. So the answer to how often you should append demographic data to your file is approximately every 6 months. To run it through maybe for a verification, 6 months to probably a year at the longest. And again, it's depending upon how you're compiling your file. So if you are a business who adds new records to your database consistently, every week you're adding a few more records or every month, you may want to look at really focusing on the 6-month window. If your database isn't growing by leaps and bounds and you kind of have more of a database that fluctuates ever so slightly, a year probably would be sufficient. The consumer databases and the business databases are updated every 30 days. And there is a ton of statistics out there about how many times, percentages of moves, changes in demographics for consumers. On the business side, titles and job functions change a lot within businesses. So with business database, I almost might say you would have to put a window on it of no more than 6 months, or you're going to end up having a little bit more of a degraded database.
Perfect. And then just to kind of circle back and remind people, because I know we have a lot on the line today who qualify themselves as beginners or novices in the data area. Appending, there's HYGIENE, which is updating, but there's also appending, which is really filling in missing holes. So you may have the mailing address for someone, but you may not have an email address. And appending lets you identify new data attributes so you can market in different ways to some of your house file as well. So another question, any advice to start segmenting data?
Sure. So if we're talking about a house file, a great way to start is really to understand who these folks are. If you have a house file that's compiled from people who come into your storefront or people who've gone on your website, you might have people who've purchased and you may have people who've only responded. Knowing who's who is going to be really important for you to take advantage of some of these profiles or even some modeling, because you need to know who made the purchase and who didn't, because you want to look at them differently. A person who responded isn't the same as a person who bought in terms of what your database is. So the first thing, if you haven't, I would say segment buyers versus responders or non-buyers. And then you might want to also start looking at things like RFM. So recency, how long ago was the last interaction you had with this person? Frequency, is this somebody who interacts with you on a more regular basis? They are somebody who's eager for your information or your product, so they're going to look different. than someone who doesn't, communicate with you on a regular basis. And then monetary. How much are these folks spending with you? Of the people who've bought, are they big spenders or little spenders? You might segment that way. So when you start looking at using profiling or even doing some appending, you might start with your best. Those who've interacted with you the most, they've bought the most, those are your key people. So when you do something like the stream profile, you really want to look at your very best customer. So segmenting your database in those ways is a great way to start kind of being able to utilize some of these other services.
Perfect. I think that's it for the questions. So I'm going to advance here. Again, like I mentioned, I know this is a lot to take in. Definitely feel free to contact your StreamWorks rep or shoot us an email or give us a call if you have any other questions or would like us to sit down and go a little more in-depth with you about what we covered today or any other data services. And if the stream profile is something that you think would be a benefit to your organization, we've got a special offer going through the end of the month. So, well, basically, it's less than half. So we feel that confident that it will provide beneficial results for you. So again, talk to your rep about that or shoot us an email if that's something that you are interested in taking advantage of. So with that, we'll let you all get back to lunch, get back to work. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully you found some insights that you can put to use right away. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.